What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another mystery tackle box tips and tricks video. I'm Matt from SB FishingTV, and today we're going to be taking a look at some baits that I like to have tied on when I'm covering water this spring. Covering water in the spring is super important because it's, number one, going to give you the highest percent of finding more fish. Two, the fish are constantly moving around. And three, fish spawn in waves. So you're going to be looking for the fish that are generally going to be shallower. I spend the majority of my time in the spring fishing shallow, between 6 inches and 7 feet of water. I think it just gives you the best probability of catching fish and getting more bites. We're going to be taking a look at a few different baits that I like to use to fish quickly and efficiently, checking different areas of different bodies of water, and hopefully these are going to help you guys get more fish in the boat this spring. So first I want to talk about covering water. You can have the trolling motor on high and just be cruising down the bank as quickly as possible, but the important thing is making high percentage casts. You don't want to just be kind of blind casting, aimlessly throwing baits around. You want to be constantly thinking about what your bait is doing, where you're casting it, always looking for cover and keeping in mind where you're getting bit and where you're catching fish, and then duplicate that, turning it into a pattern. So I was out with my friend the other day on the Potomac River with these baits I'm about to show you all tied on. We were out for a few hours and we were able to put together a pattern catching fish around docks on square bills. But let's take a look at the other baits that I had tied on. We're going to talk about when to fish them, how to fish them, and how to effectively cover water while using these baits. So first up we have the Bubonic Bugs square bill. Now this ended up being the best bait of the day. Anytime I'm on the river, I love throwing square bills, especially in this crawl pattern. This works all around the country in spring. So I'm gonna fish this in shallow water. This dives to about 5 feet. Anywhere there's rock, anywhere there's wood, I'll flip this around docks and any sort of like sandy flats you can find. It's really good for covering water. You can fish it really quick, you know, keep the boat moving fast and making 45-degree casts down the bank and just slow rolling it back. You can fish it really quick. You always want to give these like a half-second handle pause on the retrieve at some point, just in case you do have a fish following it. I find that quick little stop and letting the crankbait just sit there causes the fish to react. So that's something to keep in mind when you're fishing the square bill. I'm throwing this on either a 6/8 or 7/2 medium fast action rod. I like something with a little bit of play, so if you do hook a fish, you're not going to rip those hooks out of its mouth. Remember, the key thing with a crankbait is you want to maintain bottom contact. You constantly want this thing just like stirring up the bottom, bouncing off of every stump, piece of wood, ripping it out of the grass. Anything you can do to create some sort of reaction strike with a crankbait, that's what's going to get you bit. Next up we have the Z-Man chatterbait. I have this with a crack and crawl trailer, but there's endless amounts of trailers you can throw on this. In the spring I tend to go with something more like a crawl because it's going to imitate a bluegill more than a shad. I find that in the spring that works a little bit better for me. The fish that I am fishing for that are either on beds or getting close to it, their biggest predator this time of year is a bluegill, so they hate seeing them. So I'm fishing this on a very similar setup to the spinnerbait. This is going to be on a 7/3 medium heavy fast action rod with 15-pound fluorocarbon. I'm fishing the chatterbait in the same areas that I'm fishing the square bill, and I find that this works actually especially well anytime you find grass. That blade, the coffin-shaped blade in the front, just chops the grass up and you can constantly rip it out and create a reaction strike there. It is a little bit difficult to fish around wood sometimes because that blade digs into the wood and loves to get stuck, but it can still be done and you can still pull a lot of fish out of trees with this thing. I'll generally start throwing the chatterbait with like a slow, steady retrieve, but it's super versatile. You can fish it like a jig, really slow, and just kind of hop it back to the boat. You can burn it, and again, like I said, I start with a slow, steady retrieve. I'll do that, but then I'll add in a lot of twitches of the rod just to create that hunting action for the chatterbait and catch a ton of fish with it. So very similar to the chatterbait, we've got a spinnerbait here. This is the Googan Squad and Catch Co. Zinger. This can be fished in the same spots as the last two baits. I find I'm always picking up a spinnerbait anytime there's wind. So if I can get myself on a windy bank with wood or a little bit of grass or in the back of a spawning cove, anytime there's wind, I'll pick up that spinnerbait, and that's when it's really gonna work well. Fishing this on the exact same setup as the chatterbait, 7.3 medium heavy fast action with 15-pound fluoro. And just like the chatterbait, you can fish this in a variety of ways. You can burn it, you can slow roll it, and then you have that slow steady retrieve. But in the spring, I'm really keying in on the cover. Anytime I can get myself around docks or wood or trees or pieces of grass, I'll throw the spinnerbait around that and just try to create that reaction strike, or try to find those fish that are hiding up in the cover and pull them out with the blade. But again, it is always something I throw when there's wind. So if you have very little or no wind, that's when I'll switch to the chatterbait or the square bill. I find that they just work better in those low wind situations. And last but not least, I have the 𝘏𝐻𝐸 flip and jig rigged up, and I'm always gonna have a jig tied on, either a jig or a Texas rig when I'm trying to cover water, just in case you do come up to that one spot that just looks so juicy that it has to have something flipped into it. You do find yourself in spots sometimes where any of the moving baits are gonna be too hard to really get a bait into a certain spot where you think there might be fish and you might be able to pull something out, but that doesn't mean that I'm slowing down. So even though that I will have a jig or a Texas rig tied on, I'm gonna be fishing it quick. If I work through a lane of docks and I'm throwing the crankbait and the spinnerbait and I don't get bit, I might pick up the jig for just 5 casts, flip it to a few dock posts, literally let it hit the bottom, hop it once, and then the cast is done. Still working it really quick, still covering water effectively, and just really looking for that initial reaction bite from the jig falling to the bottom. The jig's gonna be on a flip and stick, either 7.4, 7.6 heavy to extra heavy rod with 20-pound fluorocarbon. You definitely need a high-speed gear ratio reel with that. It's gonna help you catch up with as much line that you're losing when a fish grabs it and starts running away from you or running at the boat. It'll help you pull that fish in really, really quick. So some spots that I'm gonna be really keying in on this spring to throw these baits around, I'm always looking in creeks. That's like one of the main spots that I'm always looking. I'll find myself going to the very back of the creek and checking there for fish, always keeping my eyes peeled for beds, looking for fish shallow, swimming around, and then obviously keeping an eye out for cover. Not every area is gonna be the same too. That's something else I needed to mention to you guys. So you may have a perfect looking creek with hard sandy bottom, you have grass and wood back there, but you're not finding any fish. So as I said earlier, since fish spawn in waves, that area just may not have been hit yet. So that's the importance of covering water. Check the back of that creek, run through it, fish all of the baits through it, constantly be switching and rotating through them. And if you don't get bit, get up and move. Go to the next creek down, try out on the main lake, try main lake guts, but constantly fishing shallow and focusing shallow and keying in on when you do finally catch a fish or you get bit. I hope you guys enjoyed this video on the few different baits that I like to use when covering water this spring. All these baits are available over at Shop Carl's, which will be linked down in the description below. I wish you guys good luck out there this spring trying to cover some water and catch some giant springtime bass. We'll see you guys on the next one.